you dropping a note in the comments box. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout. But to get us started, thanks for being here. As the program administrator for workforce education, I will be your primary contact for programmatic Perkins questions, application content, program feedback, performance and reports, allowable expenses, and so forth. And with that, I'll let Michelle and Dylan briefly introduce themselves and explain their roles to you.
Hi, I'm Michelle Rockwell here at the State Board. I'm a contract specialist, and among many other duties, I read all of your grant budgets and your budget narratives throughout the year. I'm also a time and effort expert, so feel free to ask me any questions about your budget, how you might be able to spend, what you can spend your money on or what you can't, or time and effort.
And hi, I'm Dylan Jillick. I'm a program assistant here at the board. I'll be able to help you with any technical questions you have about creating your application in OGMS or any access issues you're having in OGMS, also invoicing in OBIS once you get to that point. And yeah.
Great, thank you both for being here, and thank all of you for being here on the line. Today we'll be discussing this year's Perkins Plan application, hoping to provide you with assistance in accessing it in OGMS, completing the application, recognizing key fiscal terms, categories, and policies, and understanding some of the nuances and rationale for some of the major changes that we've made to this year's application. So speaking of changes, as you may have heard but not yet processed, I know that I haven't, with your submission of this year's application, we will have officially entered the era of Perkins 5, and if Perkins 4 is any indication, we may be here for a while. So that said, we are in a transitional year, and we are in some ways straddling both Perkins 4 and Perkins 5. So to be clear, this is not a Perkins 5 training, as it would be premature to offer that in the absence of a new state plan, which we've been working on since October, or before you've had an opportunity to be engaged in the effort to develop that, and that's still forthcoming. Still, this year's application has been overhauled in many ways to reflect the intent and spirit of Perkins 5 and to prepare you for other changes that might be on the horizon. So I'll get to some of those later in the webinar, but first I want to note that these revisions weren't undertaken in isolation, and I want to acknowledge Alice Madsen at Highline, Tammy Rabel at Renton, Trish Newbold at Whatcom, Lynette Bennett at Skagit, Susan Parker at Bellingham, and Terry Cox at Edmonds for reviewing the application and the report of accomplishment and providing invaluable input to us. So, if you absolutely hate the changes, you are welcome to spread some of that indignation around. In general, though, I've rewritten the vast majority of the application to accomplish the following goals. To reframe the application as a planning document, to prompt you to look forward and be aspirational rather than review past and sometimes outdated practices, to shorten and streamline the application, to lessen the burden on you as the authors and, to be honest, the burden on me as the reader of 30-some-odd applications. To eliminate redundancy by developing some more relevant and distinct sections and clearer, more specific questions, to solicit more concrete examples of activities and initiatives that are directly supported by Perkins and provide you with the opportunity to toot your own horn, so to speak, and really emphasize all the great work that you're doing, and to align some of the questions to the priorities and requirements of Perkins 5. Whoop. And speaking of Perkins 5, I was on the wrong slide. But to that end, you'll notice that there are a number of references to new points of emphasis in Perkins 5 that you'll want to begin to reflect upon for this application, your report of accomplishment, and the future. Among them are those listed on the screen, programs of study and dual credit opportunities, work-based learning, internships and apprenticeship, enrollment support and performance of students from special populations and in non-traditional fields, business and industry partnerships and alignment with in-demand fields, assessment of program quality and analysis of performance gaps, pathway-focused advising, counseling and career discernment, and faculty and staff recruitment, retention, and professional development. I should also mention at the outset that you'll hear me use the terminology CTE and professional technical interchangeably throughout the presentation. The meaning is the same, but CTE seems to be the preferred parlance nationally and is used more often in the new law. So, that being said, we'll leave plenty of time for questions at the end of the presentation and get into some of the basics. As you already know, the application was released on February 21st, so I suspect that most of you have already finished it, and we can all go back to our regularly scheduled programs. If, on the other hand, you need to be reminded, the application closes on Thursday, April 4th. Of course, State Board staff will be available to assist you between now and then, but not past 4 p.m. on April 4th. As one of your esteemed colleagues will no doubt call us at 4 o'clock on the dot to monopolize that last hour, so don't be that person. Between April 4th and mid-June, we'll be reading every page of all 30-plus applications and be providing feedback via OGMS. We anticipate that all applicants will be notified of their approval status by late June, and the grant cycle, of course, begins on July 1st, 2019. So, to get a little further into the logistics and to get me off of my soapbox, or out of the hot seat, as it were, I'll turn it over to Dylan, who will discuss some of the technical aspects of the application.
Thanks, Tim. So we'll start by getting into the Online Grant Management System, or OGMS. We'll address some frequently asked questions about the site, which is located at ogms.sbctc.edu. You'll apply for the grant in OGMS. If you don't have an account, you'll need to contact your college's OGMS security contact. They will create you an account. SBCTC staff cannot create OGMS accounts for college faculty and staff. You can find the list of security contacts in OGMS at ogms.sbctc.edu/security contacts. If you already have an OGMS account, you still need to contact your OGMS security contact for access to the 2019-20 Perkins Plan grant. Access from FY19 does not carry over to this year's application. Should you have questions about how to apply for the grant in OGMS or have other OGMS-related questions, please see the user manual under the How To tab in OGMS first. We'll do a brief demo on where you can find this helpful document. Located at the How To tab. Links are available in the slide, which will be available on the SBCTC website after this webinar concludes. So again, most frequently answered OGMS questions will be answered in the user manual. If your question is not addressed in the manual, start by contacting your organization's OGMS security contact. And if your security contact cannot help, you can contact me at the State Board. Okay, so more on access for OGMS. If you've forgotten your OGMS username and password, you can contact your security contact for your username. They likely will not have your password, but you can use the Retrieve My Password feature on the login screen. I think we were going to do a little demo of what that looks like, so I need
escape.
Just a second.
I don't know how.
Okay, so we're in a little testing site for the State Board. So this may look a little bit different from what you see on your OGMS screen, but it should generally replicate what you see when you log into OGMS. So as you can see, there's a place to log in here, and you can hit the Retrieve My Password button if you've lost your password. OGMS, after you hit this button, OGMS will email your password to you. It should email your password to you in about 30 seconds after you request it. If you don't receive the email in about 2 minutes, check your spam or junk email folder. If it's not there, double check with your security contact to make sure the email address associated with your OGMS user account is correct. As schools update email addresses, OGMS security contacts don't always remember to update user accounts at their college. So once you have access to the FY20 application, and we'll go ahead and log in here, you can create a new grant application in the Available Grants section of OGMS. After you log in, you'll see a list of grant applications you have access to near the top of your screen. So that's all of these. Actually, it's all of these, I apologize. This available grants section right down here. So a little farther down, you'll see available grants you can create a new application for. You'll locate the Perkins grant. It may be the only one you can see, and click the Create New Application button. So let's check. So we'll go ahead and we're going to, you would be clicking here on Create New Application. We are going to continue our current application that we already have in progress. So you'll see here, this is all of the grants that we've started for FY19. By default, you're going to be in the FY19 screen because we're currently in FY19. You'll need to go to the FY20 screen to work on your current application. So you'll click that button there, and we're just going to edit our FY20 Perkins Plan right there. So you're only going to create the application once. After you create your application, you'll find your grant application in the screen that I just showed. If you don't see the application anywhere, contact your college's OGMS security contact. OGMS does have a security feature where after 20 minutes of inactivity, OGMS will log you out. OGMS only counts clicking the Save button and clicking from one screen to another as activity. Typing will not count as activity. As you see down here at the bottom of the screen, there's the Save button. So clicking radio buttons or checkboxes also doesn't count as activity. The good news is that at the 15-minute mark, OGMS has a pop-up window that comes up and lets you know you'll need to save or you'll be logged out and lose all the work you've done since you last saved. FYI, your browser may block the pop-up window, so make sure you save frequently. Okay, so now that you know how to log into OGMS and find the application, let's go ahead and walk through sections of the application. The first section that you'll see is the application info screen, which we're showing right now. This is where you're going to enter your contact info. Both contacts listed here will get emails from OGMS, but only the first contact listed will get the official award email from OBIS. Please be sure that the person listed first is the person who will be the main grant contact all year long should the grant get funded. It's entirely possible that your college will require you to put someone from the grants office in either the primary or secondary contact field. Please check in with them about this. Also, just be very careful when entering your email address. If you have a typo in your email address, you won't get the automated emails from OGMS. These are the emails that tell you if your application has been returned and needs modifications and other pertinent things. So then we're going to move on to grant resources. Up by the top of the screen, you are going to see a link up on the right here. This is the grant info section of the application. I'm going to go ahead and click into it. This is where you're going to find the grant guidelines and grant fiscal guideline documents. Please visit that link and read the documents to get the scoop on what's allowed in these grants, who to contact for info, timeline, deadlines, etc. Clicking on the Grant Info tab opens another screen. So to get back to your application, you'll need to close out the window or tab, depending on your browser, and select the window you're working in. I'm going to open up the grant guidelines now, and Tim will walk us through several items of note and changes for FY20's guidelines.
Thank you, Dylan.
Sorry, it didn't pull it up the way I wanted it to.
Shame.
All right.
Make that bigger.
Yes,
yeah, so
we will.
So what you see here are the grant guidelines, and I should start by saying that while the operational content of the grant guidelines...
That's what I want, I'm sorry.
Well, I'll start with my preface while she's working on that. I'm sorry, they are working on that.
That's probably a little bit better.
All right. So while the operational content of the grant guidelines have not been substantially revised, we should note that some changes have been made to align with Perkins 5. Other elements have not changed, but they do warrant some discussion. So if we could scroll down to programs of study.
There you go.
The first thing that we've addressed is programs of study, and Perkins 5 emphasizes programs of study and for the first time includes a formal definition. So that's been added to the guidelines. And while I don't foresee any major implications to this in the year to come, there will certainly be conversations in the near future about how we define, approve, code, and inventory programs of study going forward. So as you'll see in the application, there's a noteworthy effort on our part to better understand your college's approach to establishing programs of study and other dual credit articulations. But for the purposes of the grant guidelines, I don't think this is earth-shattering news. If we could go down to professional development, which is not far below. Here too, we've added some text from Perkins 5. You'll note that Perkins 5 requires professional development to be sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom-focused. In short, we're moving away from isolated single-day workshops and seminars. Fortunately, we have a robust state-mandated CTE faculty certification process that, in our opinion, allows us to demonstrate that even one-off trainings contribute to a more sustained and intensive approach to professional development. So that said, this again isn't earth-shattering news, but our state plan will likely add a bit more flavor to this, so you should keep this definition in mind as you conceive of future professional development initiatives. Expectations and requirements may, emphasis on may, be more rigid in the years to come, but for this year, I think it's important just to bring attention to the new definition. Moving on down to accountability, this is obviously a section in which we're still straddling Perkins 4 and 5. So although we know that what the new indicators are, and we'll touch on those a bit later, we don't have targets set in the transition year, so we've opted to stick with what we know here. Know that while we may still collect the data for Perkins 4 indicators, in fact we will collect that data, we're not required to report on it to the feds. So that said, we still have a responsibility for ensuring accountability, so whether or not we're reporting on it, we still require some form of an improvement plan for missed targets, which is outlined herein, especially since many of them do overlap with those performance indicators in Perkins 5. Colleges will not, however, have to dedicate 1.5% of their award to missed indicators this year or next, and those clauses have been eliminated. Yay. As far as funding is concerned, the funding formula hasn't changed in eons, but I have no doubt that it will with the implementation of a new state plan. For now, however, it is what it was, and I've spoken to a lot of you already about the formula in light of your projected awards, but if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. So long story short, if you saw your award and wondered how we came to those numbers, that funding formula that is in the grant guidelines will tell you that. Review and reporting was covered in part in the timeline earlier, but I'll reiterate that applications are due on April 4th. Feedback is provided between then and late May, and the plans must be substantially approvable by July 1 of 2019 when the grant cycle officially begins. Final reports in the form of a revised report of accomplishment will have to be uploaded to OGMS by July 31st, 2020. And you'll be completing this document for your 2018-19 Perkins Plan in a few short months. So you'll notice then that it changed significantly in preparation for the transition to Perkins 5. And next year's ROA may change as well with the adoption of a new state plan, but our hope is that this year's revisions will preclude us from having to undertake another substantial overhaul in 2020. So fingers crossed that we've checked a lot of the boxes already. So now we'll take a quick look at the appendices. Again, we don't have new targets with respect to performance indicators and won't be reporting on them in 2020, so this is a holdover from Perkins 4. We will, however, be attempting to gather some baseline data on the new indicators, which are, and I should have put these into the PowerPoint for you, but you can look them up. 1P1 is the percentage of CTE concentrators who, during the second quarter after program completion, remain enrolled in post-secondary education, are in advanced training, military service, or a service program that receives assistance under Title I of the National and Community Service Act of 1990, that is AmeriCorps in plain terms, or are volunteers described in Section 5 of the Peace Corps Act, or are placed or retained in employment. That's your 1P1. It sounds a lot like our existing indicator with a few subtle changes that we're working on internally. 2P1 will be the percentage of CTE concentrators who receive a recognized post-secondary credential during participation or within 1 year of program completion. And 3P1 is the percentage of CTE concentrators in career and technical education programs and programs of study that lead to non-traditional fields. So these are fairly similar with some nuance to them. So while simpler, they will require extensive disaggregation by demographics, special populations, and CTE program. We'll touch on that in a bit. So those are your performance indicators. As far as frequently asked questions are concerned, Appendix B, this has been pretty significantly pared down, and much of it's somewhat irrelevant due to the change in indicators. It's still worth noting, though, that until the new targets are in place, we'll continue to require performance plans, as I mentioned before, for missed targets, as most of them do dovetail in some way with the new indicators. Rolling down to definitions, which is Appendix C, Perkins 5 includes 55 definitions, which is an increase of 21 from Perkins 4. We don't need to go into all of this in detail because it would take us a couple days, but you should just note that this appendix has been expanded to be consistent with the new law. Appendix E, required and permissive use of funds. Yeah, it's going to take you a while to scroll through that. Like Appendix C, Appendix E has been revised to reflect the content of Perkins 5. While it does allow more flexibility in spending, we don't anticipate making any radical changes to our funding and allocation policies until such time as we have a new state plan implemented. So to that end, it's important to note that the unallowable costs section of the fiscal guidelines, not the grant, but the fiscal guidelines, has not changed for 2019-2020. Finally, direct assistance to students is Appendix F, and only about 15% of our colleges utilize Perkins for financial aid, so we won't spend a whole lot of time here, but I will note that we beefed up our policies and provided guidance on direct assistance to students in the summertime, and that's included here. So if you do anticipate using Perkins to provide aid to students, please review these guidelines closely. So, with that.
All right, we're going to go back into the grant information page that we were looking at. You'll find 3 other important documents in the grant information page. Those are the fiscal guidelines, the planning numbers, and the programs of study verification form. Michelle and Tim, anything you'd like to highlight on these documents?
Yes.
All right. I didn't need to write that question in, but there it is.
So I'd just like to quickly take note of the instructions on the program of study form. If you can pull it up, that would be great. If not, it's no biggie. For record keeping and sorting purposes, it's just really important that we have consistent formatting and an accurate count of the number of distinct dual credit articulations. So as you'll see there on the form, it's been revised. It looks a lot like what you've seen before, but we would ask that you please include only numbers in the zip code column, not dashes or spaces or periods, and make sure that you're identifying all high schools with which you have articulation agreements. Don't just write Riverdale District, especially if you don't offer courses at every school in that district. If you do, if you do offer articulations to every school in a district, and only if, you can enter the number of schools in the high school name field next to the district. So if you have articulations with all 17 schools in Riverdale District, you can put Riverdale District, and then next to that in the high school field, just put the number 17. That gives us the count we need. Otherwise, we're left guessing, and it makes it really hard to sort and get an accurate count of how many distinct dual credit courses we're offering in which programs.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to point out the fiscal guidelines, and I'm hoping we can open those up for a second.
Yeah, sorry.
No worries. In addition to all kinds of general grant terms and references to overall federal rules, things that are disallowed under Perkins, et cetera, you can also find descriptions of each budget activity and each category. And we'll talk more about that later in this presentation, but I want to show you like pages 4 to 6. This is where we'll have examples of how to write your budget narrative. These examples are kind of the, scroll down just a touch there, see where it says salaries, and you can see an example. Oh, we're not, that's okay, stay there.
Sorry.
Go back up a little, there. Like where it says travel, and it has examples, and building rental, and it has examples. Those examples are the level of detail we need in your budget narrative. You don't necessarily have to explain any more than that. You may, depending on certain wording you use, but you don't need to write 3 paragraphs of what you're going to buy or how you're going to spend your money necessarily. Thanks.
Okay, and please download these documents as needed. So moving on, we're going to click out of this tab, we're going to talk about assurances and how to download, upload documents. And this here on the screen, you can see that this is what's going to pop up and tell you, OGMS is going to not save your data. Don't let that happen to you. Okay, so the next tab up here is the assurances tab. So the Perkins grant does have a standard assurance. Clicking in here, which you can find in a separate tab. You will need to click on the 2019-20 assurances document. So usually, depending on your browser settings, it will open another tab with it, or it may just download and open it in whatever PDF editor you have. So from here, you can print or download the assurances document for completion and proper signature. And this is going to need to be uploaded as an attachment to consider your application complete. This has already been agreed to here, but normally there is a little place where you type in your name and the date and agree to the assurances officially. Okay, so you'll upload your assurances to the attachment section, which is the same place you upload your programs of study documents. And so the attachments tab is here on the right side of the OGMS screen, and here's a little brief walkthrough of how this works. Just click into there, select the tab, then just click on the choose file. We'll just upload a random file here. So you'll click the file that you want to upload, hit, and if you've chosen the wrong file, you can click the reset button to remove your file. So you can't delete files once they've been uploaded. Don't worry, we'll simply consider the most recently uploaded file as the file you intended to upload, or you can email us and let us know which file you mean for us to use. We're going to go back into the PowerPoint. Don't want to start from there. Just a second, sorry. And we are going to have our first, and I'm doing this incorrectly, but we're going to have a little break for questions. After this short question and answer time, we'll talk about some of the questions in the application, as well as budget and budget narrative and the grant and fiscal accountability section of the application. So just focus on the material we've covered so far.
Don't jump the gun.
And I'm trying to figure out how to start it from here, but failing. So please feel free to type your questions into the chat or unmute yourself and ask.
We're doing a good job. Nobody has any questions.
I guess so. I don't know how to start this way.
I'm okay with awkward silences. No, I'm not. I just wrote. I love watching the closed caption.
Yeah.
Catch my jokes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Will assurances be updated with Perkins 5 versus Perkins 4? I believe that we caught that. There was somebody gave us some feedback real early on, I think day one, that the application was released, and observed that the Perkins 4 terminology was in there. And Trish, I don't know. I think that might have been you. But in whatever case, we did make some edits to it. So I think the assurances document that is there is current.
And if it isn't, that's my bad, and I will get it uploaded later today. So sorry about that. We have the document ready if it hasn't been uploaded, and it should be corrected today.
Does the president need to sign an assurance, or can any executive sign it on behalf of the college? Michelle?
We trust that your college will have the appropriate person sign. Do you happen to remember, Tim or Dylan, if the assurances document requires a president's signature or just a designated?
I think that it indicates
We can check.
that it does. Yes, it does say college president name, college president signature.
Yes, and we do need your college president. If your college president is out of the office and has delegated signature authority to someone else, and that someone else is who's there when you're ready to have this signed, that's okay.
Yeah, it's not the right one. That's what you're looking for.
Shame on Dylan.
So yes, this is the, I'm going to upload the Perkins 5 assurances document today.
Assurances 2.0.
Apologies.
In Dylan's defense, we've got like 6 or 8 different grant applications going on right now.
All right, are there any other questions before we move along? Oh.
That's the wrong one.
Now, Trish is saying that assurances does say Perkins 5.
Oh, well.
It could be that my computer that we're presenting from is bringing up a cached copy.
Yes, it could. That happened to my computer too.
So no shame on Dylan.
Good.
I did my job.
Shame retracted.
All right.
All right, we'll move on to comments. Contents.
Okay. So for this, we're going to go back into our little OGMS demo. So this brings us to the contents part of the application. Contents is another tab that you'll be editing in OGMS. You're going to just click into that tab. So you must complete each section and mark the check to mark as complete box at the bottom of each section before you can submit an application. So that's this box here. Be sure to click the Save button on every screen and no less often than every 20 minutes to prevent getting timed out and losing any content. You may also choose to write your responses in Word and copy them into the application to ensure that you don't lose any content along the way. If you choose to do so, know that the character, not word, count for most sections is limited to 2,500, which is approximately a half page of text. So I'm just going to show you what it looks like to finish this really quickly. I'm just going to type some gibberish into these boxes here. So type some stuff in, check to mark as complete, save. So once you check a section as complete, the little icon in the content section up here at the top turns into a check mark. This lets you easily see which sections you still need to complete. So I've completed 1 and 2, but I still need to complete everything else. You don't have to complete the sections in order, and even if you mark a section as complete, you can still go back and change it as long as you haven't already submitted your application. Just be sure to click the Save button after you make any changes. Looks like I've already finished this part. Just as a heads up, you are required to answer questions marked with a red asterisk. The OGMS won't let that slide. You'll have to finish those to submit your application. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Tim to go over the updates he has on the content section.
Great, and we can probably bring it back to the PowerPoint rather than trying to scroll through the system. Sure. As I mentioned previously, we've overhauled the entire application in preparation for Perkins 5, but also sought to make it more user-friendly, less redundant, shorter, and more descript. To that end, you'll notice that there are new sections and some preamble, conditions, examples, and such associated with many of the questions. Ultimately, the goal is for you to approach this as a planning document and be more specific about how you envision Perkins supporting your CTE programs and what you intend to do with the funds. So that said, we'll briefly review the structure and sections, but I would recommend, as I mentioned in the introduction, that you read all of the questions before digging in to ensure that you're not covering topics in one that are more appropriate for another section. So to start with section 1, that being a general overview, this is an opportunity for you to tell us in broad terms how you intend to use Perkins funds and how they contribute to your overall goals for your CTE program. It addresses your vision, priorities, and most innovative or influential programs and initiatives. With respect to question 1.1, which we've already gotten some questions about, your figures needn't be exact or perfectly aligned with your budget narrative, and we're just looking for a general picture of how you intend to use your Perkins funding. So that doesn't need to be real precise. We just kind of want an estimate of what your program goals are. Section 2 involves program quality and improvement, and you'll see that many of these questions have been asked in different ways previously, but what you'll see is an emphasis on examples, description, and specificity to Perkins. Perkins 5 is intensely concerned with program quality and improvement and innovation, so here we're looking for real specific examples of how Perkins dollars are being utilized to contribute to a highly skilled workforce in high-wage, in-demand professions. So, for example, questions 2.1 and 2.2 are looking for concrete examples of work-based learning, standardized assessments, professional standards, etc. And 2.3 is requiring a succinct but thorough description of your program review process. So, section 3 is all about career guidance and academic counseling. Again, we're looking for Perkins-specific examples here, but some Perkins 5 highlights would include terms like career discernment, pathways, transition to BA programs. This isn't really radically changed, but we are just looking for more detail from you. Section 4 revolves around partnerships and programs of study. It's probably one of the most substantial sections, as Perkins 5 is borderline obsessed about stakeholder engagement, programs of study, industry relevance, and labor market informed program development. So as I'm sure you know, the most significant feature in Perkins 5 is the biennial local needs assessment, for which we'll be developing a template and guidance along with the state plan. In the meantime, however, you'll want to be thinking and writing about what you're already doing to ensure that your programs reflect business and industry needs, and that the right people are at the table to make recommendations. In addition, we'll want to hear about how you're deliberately partnering with your colleagues in the K-12 system to develop, improve, market, and recruit for your programs of study. So in the months and years to come, I think we'll see a lot of work being done to overhaul our practices with respect to dual credit articulation in programs of study. So now is the time to start evaluating what's working, what's not, and what opportunities or strategies might be better for your college. Section 5 is about faculty and staff recruitment, retention, and professional development. These questions probably aren't unfamiliar, but it deserves to be mentioned that the faculty staff diversity is a major feature of Perkins 5, and the law has added a pretty elaborate definition of professional development. specifying again that it must be sustained, intensive, collaborative, job-embedded, data-driven, and classroom-focused. While our state CTE faculty certification requirements ensures that the most professional development activities will meet this criteria, you should anticipate a greater amount of scrutiny of your PD activities in the future, and keep this definition in mind as you conceptualize and design professional development initiatives in the future. Section 6 is dedicated to special populations and non-traditional fields. There's a concern for recruitment, support, and performance of underrepresented students, and that's another highlight of Perkins 5 reflected in the application. As you may know, we will have to start disaggregating performance data by special populations and programs or career clusters, and identifying and responding to performance gaps will be a requirement moving forward. So that said, this year's questions really specifically ask you to address efforts to, 1, reduce barriers, 2, provide equitable access, 3, increase enrollment, and 4, improve completion rates, and 5, promote and maintain a discrimination-free environment. As we begin to look more closely at the disaggregated data, you should anticipate more questions on this topic in the future. Section 7, finally, is dedicated to performance indicators. It's similar to what you've seen before, and as discussed previously, 1P1 and to 5P2 are going away, and they're being replaced by just 3 performance indicators. However, we will still have the responsibility to ensure accountability and emphasize program improvement. So that being said, performance plans will still be required. There was some question about this in the development of the application. Performance plans will still be required for missed targets, but I have tried to ease things up a bit by merging indicators that address similar expectations. Therefore, only 1 improvement plan will be required of you if you missed 1P1 or 2P1, 1 improvement plan for missing 3P1, and 1 if you missed 5P1 or 5P2 or both. Again, note that the new indicators look a lot like their predecessors, so there's value in addressing these challenge areas, even if the language is changing. So if there's nothing else that my colleagues would like to elaborate upon as far as the content of the application, I can hand it back to Michelle to discuss budget activities.
Okay. So let's go through budget activities and categories now. This grant has 3 activities or lines and several categories or columns. For accounting, tracking, and reporting purposes, it's critical that things be budgeted on the correct budget lines and in the correct budget cells. For this grant, you're going to use most of your budget for the required and permissive uses budget line or activity. The performance indicators line is only used if you've missed your performance targets and that you need to budget funds in that specific area to increase your performance and to meet those targets. Tim, did you say we're not doing that this year?
Yeah.
So my feedback there is don't budget anything on the performance indicators line this year.
Yep.
And then the administration line is where you can budget up to 5% of your grant total for administrative expenses related to your program. These would include things like staff time for oversight of programs, grant administrative requirements like grant writing and billing, monitoring budgets or reports, supervision of staff or faculty, and associated expenses. This is also where you could budget up to budget indirect expenses. Indirect cannot exceed 5% of salaries budgeted to your grant, not benefits, just salaries, and must still fit within the 5% allowable for administration. Budget categories are the columns in your budget, and the first one is salaries and benefits. This is where you're going to budget costs for employees at your college. This is only for direct employees, not any contractors that you may have or faculty or staff at other colleges. You must include staff titles, a brief description of their duties as they relate to this grant, and some kind of salary breakdown. For that salary breakdown, you can either give us an FTE or an FTEF. FTE is full-time equivalent staff. FTEF is full-time equivalent faculty. You could also give us the percent of their salary funded by the grant, or if that's really complicated or they're part-time, you could always give us an hourly wage. We need to know that the costs you're funding to the grant are reasonable, and the only way that we can make sure that they're reasonable is that some kind of a salary breakdown. Please note that you cannot fund instruction with this grant, but you may still cover portions of faculty salaries or stipends for professional development or curriculum development or any support work that faculty may do for events or that type of thing, just no instruction itself. Page 4 of the grant fiscal guidelines document has examples of how to format narratives, your narrative answers for salaries. Pages 16 and 17 of the fiscal guidelines contain details to help you calculate FTE and FTEF. Your grants office or your budget office can also probably help you with that. Even if you don't need help calculating FTE and FTEF, you still should work with your grants office or your budget office on your budget as well. Also, don't forget that any position funded in whole or in part by a federal grant, such as Perkins, must complete time and effort throughout the grant period. There's a bit on that on pages 12 and 13 of the fiscal guidelines, and there's an entire manual devoted to time and effort that you can find in the how-to section of OGMS. You can also find it on our website. Just search for time and effort once you're at SBCT's website, and it's also available in OBIS. Goods and services is where you're going to budget items that you'll purchase from these grant funds. Please tell us what kind of goods and services you'll purchase. Don't just say, I'm going to purchase goods and services. All goods and services purchased must be in support of specific career and technical education or CTE programs. So be sure your narrative reflects that. You can't use these grant funds to purchase general office supplies for your workforce office. You can, however, purchase office supplies that directly support your aerospace program or your nursing program, for example. You can say you'll purchase classroom materials and supplies for your welding program. You don't have to necessarily list every program you'll purchase materials for. You just simply have to reference that any of the items purchased will be in support of specific CTE programs. In your budget narrative, if in your budget narrative you use the term equipment, and I'm making air quotes around the word equipment, you just can't see it. Be sure to tell us that your equipment doesn't meet the definition of capital outlays. We'll discuss that a little bit more in the presentation, but I just want to point that out because inevitably several colleges will say, oh, we're going to purchase small equipment for our programs. We need to know that the small equipment isn't actually capital outlays, or it's small equipment under $5,000. Those types of words help us know. Also, please note that any non-consumable goods you'll purchase must be retained by your college. Items purchased cannot be given to students. Students may use them and even check them out, but the college must ultimately retain them. So, for example, you could purchase a set of books for classroom use in a CTE program. You could check them out to students. You just can't give them to keep permanently. You're also going to budget services here in the goods and services budget cell. Services include interagency agreements or interlocal agreements, if that's what your college calls them, and those are defined as contracts between two or more public entities. So if your college has a contract with another community college or a K-12 school or a state agency, those are interagency agreements, and those are actually considered services by the state, so they'd be budgeted in your goods and services. Building rental and utilization is if you have to rent space to accomplish grant objectives. This might be rent at a community building where you offer services related to CTE. Any rent charged to the grant has to be at or below what is considered to be fair market value in your area. So in your budget narrative, verify that rent is at or below fair market value, or FMV. Also, please keep documentation that backs that statement up on file at your organization. Your grants or your business office can help you determine fair market value for your area. Finally, the only way you can charge rent of a college or a college foundation-owned facility to this grant is if your college or foundation has a policy that rent is charged to every program, not just your CTE programs or your Perkins programs. If that's the case, be sure to include in your budget narrative that it is your college's policy to charge rent to all programs, and be sure to keep documentation in your files as well on that policy. Travel is the next budget category. It's fairly self-explanatory. Just tell us why the travel is required. Is it for meetings with other colleges, for shared projects? Is it travel to professional development activities? Is it something else? If it's travel for WEC, please note that WEC is considered to be an administrative activity, and so it must be budgeted on the admin line of your budget, not the required and permissive uses line. The only reminders I have for you on travel are that all state travel rules must be followed and all state travel rates must be used. Even though these are federal funds, your college is still a state entity and still has to follow the state rules in addition to federal rules. And your college probably also has internal processes and rules you have to follow on travel as well. Just because this is a grant doesn't mean you can get around any kind of local rules on that. Contracts is the next budget category. This is where you're going to budget any true contracts your organization has. This might be something like a guest speaker, or you might have a contractor to do some curriculum development for you. Give us a brief description of what the contract is for. And don't forget that any rules that apply to your organization under this grant also have to be passed along to the contractor. For example, you're required to follow state rules and rates for travel. So if you contract with someone and you're going to reimburse their travel expenses, you have to make sure that they're also going to follow state rules and state rates for that travel. Capital outlays is next. The most important thing to remember with capital outlays is that they must be approved by SBCTC prior to your organization making the purchase. If you're not already in your budget, do a budget revision in OBIS to add them before you make the purchase. Capital outlays are defined as property or equipment with a useful life in excess of 1 year and a per unit acquisition of $5,000 or more. The best example I can give of that is like a sim mannequin for a healthcare program. Those are really expensive, definitely over $5,000, and they have a useful life in excess of 1 year. Those have to be approved prior to purchase by the state board. And anything else, not just sims, anything that meets the definition of capital outlays. Capital outlays must also be, let me backtrack. So in your budget, we need you to be pretty specific about the capital outlays that you're going to purchase. So you need to tell us, I'm going to buy this sim mannequin, or I'm going to buy this specific piece of welding equipment, or this specific baking oven for the culinary program. We don't need like a serial number or anything quite that specific, but definitely tell us what it is you're purchasing. We have to know what it is and approve those very specific items. They also have to typically be considered special purpose items to be eligible as an expense from this grant. General purpose items like furniture with a per unit price of $5,000 or more will not be approved from this grant. They have to be specific for CTE programs. Tuition books and fees is where you'll budget any tuition books for students or required student fees. A couple of notes on this. This is only for special population students or non-traditional employment and training students. Your college has to have a broader effort to address the needs of special population CTE students in order to budget funds here. And in order for you to be able to charge student fees to this grant, fees have to be required fees. They also have to be required of all students, not just these particular students. Tuition, books, and required fees can be paid from this grant, but funds can never be given directly to a student. So if you're going to use these funds and you haven't used them before, probably your best thing to do is contact Tim and I just to make sure you're on the right track.
And as we mentioned before, there's an addendum in the grant guidelines that's very specific. It's important to note that Perkins is designed to be a last resort for financial aid and fees and things of that like. So direct assistance to students really has to come after all other financial assistance options have been exhausted, and you need to be able to document that through whatever your internal procedures are.
Indirect is our last budget category. So your college can claim up to 5% of salaries, but not benefits, charged to this grant in indirect. And indirect covers such things as operation, maintenance, library, student administration, and expenses that cannot clearly be allocated to any one individual program. Any questions about any of the content Tim talked about or any of the budget content? After this question and answer period, we'll cover the grant and fiscal accountability section of the application and the application feedback and approval process, and then we'll take additional questions at that time as well.
This is John from North Seattle College. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, John.
Hi. So this is probably one of those questions that's probably better not asked, ask for forgiveness, not permission kind of question. But I'm a little confused about BAS programs because obviously BAS programs, the first 2 years of a BAS programs are lower division and therefore can receive support through Perkins as part of those lower division programs those first 2 years. And then there's also something in Perkins that I believe says that transition from lower division to upper division is also, potentially fundable support to keep people on the pathway. We're all about building pathways in Perkins, and the pathway goes up, potentially up to the baccalaureate. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is exactly sort of where is that line, that fuzzy line about what you can and you can't pay for that relates to, outreach and recruitment and the building of BAS pathways that include a lower division that, is an AAS degree. And sort of, do you have a sense or a general rule of what's okay and what's not okay especially around outreach marketing and transition support?
Yeah, John, I've gotten enough questions about this over the last few months that we will be having some technical assistance calls with Jose Figueroa, who's our representative with Octay. I will ask him directly for a response to that. My understanding, based upon the guidelines or guidance, I should say, that came out of the Senate Help Committee was that there's a fairly bright line, and that it's and I can send you the link or the quote that I pulled from there that essentially said, Perkins is not intended to support BAS programs. Ironically, there is an emphasis in Perkins 5 on supporting, of course, pathways and transitions into BA programs. So the irony is not lost on me, and what you said is I totally understand, because there's an emphasis on getting people into BA programs, but they're fairly descript about saying that it is for what the language is, the pre-baccalaureate is maybe the language, but it very clearly seems to state that it's not intended to support BA programs, including their marketing and recruitment. So it's a nettlesome topic, and I totally can empathize with the challenges that you and others are having with that line. So I will work to get an answer and send maybe some system-wide guidance on it, because it's become, especially with the emergence of all the BAS programs, a really sticky topic.
Thank you. And it's really difficult when you're trying to reach out to the high schools, because the whole 2+2 thing gets lost on high school students and their parents. They don't get that. Right. They just, they're interested in the BAS, and the fact that they're going to be in Perkins eligible programs for the first 2 years is just obviously not something they know about or care about. So when you talk to high school students, you talk to them about a BAS program. You don't talk to them about the fact that they're going to get an associate degree on their way to getting a BAS.
Right. Yeah.
So that's where it gets really difficult.
Yeah, and I understand that difficulty, and at the same time, we have to keep in mind the intent and the spirit of Perkins, and that is to support CTE programs specifically. And the BAS programs, while they have roots, if you will, in the CTE programs, obviously they are their own programs, and I think that's where the distinction lies. The other challenge herein is opening the doors to BA programs elsewhere, and they were really clear in offering that guidance because there was so much pushback on it, in saying that no, this is not intended to support BA programs, period, anywhere, because you can see the university system chomping at the bit if we put a foot in that door.
Yeah, I guess I would argue that BAS is, because they're 2+2 programs, are CTE programs.
Yeah.
They obviously don't want to go there.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I absolutely do. But yeah, I understand that distinction. So I'll try to get some guidance on that.
Thank you. Great.
We'll go right to the source.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Okay.
All right, there will be time at the end.
Yep.
So if you have them and you didn't get them in, then please, by all means, hold them, and we'll get to them momentarily because we don't have a whole lot left in the presentation.
So Section 9 of the grant application is about grant and fiscal accountability. For those of you that have worked with state board grants for a while, you probably know that a couple of years ago we started adding a grant and fiscal accountability section to our federal grants. This was based on a federal rule change a couple of years ago that requires SBCTC, as a pass-through entity, to conduct a risk assessment of each grantee prior to awarding a grant. The questions in Section 9 are one small part of how we get at that risk assessment. This is merely one of the ways SBCTC determines how much of a risk, if at all, it is for us to award these federal funds to your college. Be honest and accurate with these answers in Section 9, but don't stress about these answers impacting your funding. If your answers are really concerning to us, we may want additional explanation, or we may suggest process changes to minimize that level of risk. However, it is extremely unlikely that your funding will be altered because of these answers. You'll notice that these questions are the same as you answered last year. Rather than just copying and pasting last year's answers, though, please do be sure to review and update them. It does raise the level of risk just a little bit if you've copied and pasted and we happen to know, like, oh no, you actually did have a staff change, so your answers should be slightly different. So just do a quick read through and make sure. It's also very possible that your local processes may have changed, continuous improvement. We're hoping that maybe things have changed a little bit. Or your staff might have changed, that type of thing. So maybe last year's answers aren't completely accurate anymore.
Okay, so we're gonna go into how to submit your grant application. So once you've completed every part of the grant application, you can go to the Submit tab of the application in OGMS and submit the application to SBCTC. We're gonna go ahead and go back into OGMS and just show you that tab really quick.
Probably timed out.
And we may have timed out, so bear with us.
Cautionary tale.
We have.
It happens to all of us.
Okay, so once you've completed all of these tabs, and once they all have, so you can see that the assurances has a check mark up here. Once they all have check marks, there will be little dialog boxes here where you can type in your name, title, and phone number. You click, there will also be a submit button.
If you have access to submit.
Yes. If you have the submit button, go ahead and click that once you've entered your information. We get a notification from OGMS, so you don't need to call or email us. If you refresh your screen, the status on your end should change from, as you can see up here right now, it's in process. It'll change from in process to submitted. The OGMS user manual will show you where you can find the status as well. So as Michelle mentioned, if there aren't any boxes on the screen for you to type your name or there isn't a submit button, first check to make sure every section of your application is completed and that you've checked to mark each section complete at the bottom of every screen and that every tab has a check mark on it. If all of that, every tab has a check mark and you still don't have content boxes and a submit button on the submit screen, check with your OGMS security contact. It's very likely that that person did not set your OGMS permissions adequately for you to be able to submit the grant. This may be an oversight or by design, as different colleges have different protocol on who can actually submit grant applications.
I just want to jump in because I've been here at the State Board for a long time and used to take a lot of OGMS technical assistance calls. This is why it's kind of important not to wait until the final day to submit your application. If you can at all, do it ahead of time, because you never know when your permissions might not be completely, you might not have all the permissions that you need to have. And if you're trying to submit it at, 6 o'clock on the deadline day and your security person at your college isn't at work anymore and your backup security contact is on vacation in Hawaii and totally not answering their emails or phone. This happens more often than we'd like it to happen. So, make sure you have the right permissions ahead of time and try your best to submit it a day or two ahead of time just so that these don't happen.
Thanks for adding that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go into is, I'm just going to stay on in OGMS and not go back to the PowerPoint for right now. We're going to talk about application feedback and approval. So it's possible that your grant application may require minor revisions before we can approve it for funding. These are often minor budget changes like an item is allowable but must be moved from one budget category to another. If this is the case, you'll receive an email from OGMS letting you know that you have feedback for your grant. Once you've logged into OGMS, you'll see that your grant status has changed from submitted to follow-up. Any feedback that SBCTC has on applications, including necessary modifications, will be on the feedback tab of OGMS. So it's also up here. We'll click into that. We don't have any feedback right now. So if there is feedback, either Tim, Michelle, or I will type in instructions on what you need to change. It's on the right side of the screen after you click into your grant application. So to respond to feedback, you're going to go to the question number related to your feedback. For example, if the feedback asks you to make a change to question 2.2a, click into Contents Section 2 in your application. Locate question 2.2a and change the text in the narrative box. Once you made the changes, be sure to save at the bottom of each applicable content screen, then resubmit your application on the Submit tab. Once your grant has been approved, you'll receive an email notifying you of the new status of your grant, and when you log into OGMS to view your Perkins grant, your grant status will have changed to approved. I'd just like to show a couple more things on this screen really quick. So up here at the top, you can see this is the Security Contacts tab. This is where you're going to find, if you don't know what your OGMS username is, or if you need to have an account created for you, this is where you can find your school's security contact.
And remember, this is our test site, so it doesn't have a lot of the right content. So if you happen to notice on the security tab, there were like a couple of random schools listed and not a whole bunch of schools listed.
Right.
The real site has all of your colleges listed.
It's a very long list, so it's probably best for you to just Control F and type in your college's name. That'll be the best way to find it. And then also up here is the How-To tab, which has that user manual that we mentioned and a couple of other useful. There's the time and effort, how to use spell check in your browser, all that kind of stuff. And then online apps is back where we find the applications. Okay, so that wraps it up for how to submit your application. And we have time for questions. This is your little section?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's it, really, for OGMS, and that's the new application in a nutshell. We hope that the changes will make the application more manageable and help you to approach the grant more deliberately and with an eye towards tooting your own horn, so to speak, by highlighting the innovative and impactful things you're doing. It deserves to be mentioned that this year's report of accomplishment has undergone a similar overhaul with the input of your colleagues mentioned earlier. It has roughly the same structure and was developed with much the same rationale and intent in mind. So while there will be undoubtedly some more changes to both documents or both practices with the implementation of a new state plan, we hope that this year's revisions will mitigate the impact of those to come. And so that being said, of course, we're very open to your feedback on how we can improve this application process or the report of accomplishment in the future, and we welcome your input and suggestions. So with that, we are open for additional questions. If you have anything that you want to circle back to with respect to today's presentation, or broader questions that we might be able to answer in the next 15 minutes or so. Wow, we really did do a good job.
This is going to end Friday on a good note.
Ending about an hour early.
Yeah.
All right, it's been fairly quiet. So I'll call it, if nobody else will, and say we welcome your feedback. We welcome any questions. If you prefer to ask them offline or online via email, you are welcome to contact any one of us for whichever topic is pertinent to the three of us. Drop us a line via email. Our numbers are up there, so feel free to give us a call. For your colleagues who may not have joined this, either at your own institutions or elsewhere, know that we have recorded this, and we have our fingers crossed that the recording worked. And if it did, we will have that posted to the website. I don't know what the timeline is. Shortly.
Next week? 2 weeks from now? Something like that? Probably next week.
Great. Okay, well, hopefully you'll all have an opportunity to dig into this soon, and I'm sure questions will be forthcoming once you've done that. So on behalf of my colleagues here in the room and the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, thank you for participating. We appreciated the opportunity.